You're listening to the Grind Line Podcast.
What's up, and welcome to another episode of the Grind Line Podcast. You're listening to episode 316. I'm your host, Greg. I'm here tonight with Ryan. Trade deadline day is done. There is some news to be made, some sad news, some, I guess, okay news once you get through the Steve Yzerman press conference notes. But Ryan, how are you on this glorious day?
All things considered, I'm not awful. I'll kind of put it that way, and so we can just kind of go right into it.
I'm out of bourbon, so as you can see,
I am not. I am fresh.
Drinking vodka on ice. It's punchki vodka, so it's like raspberry vodka, made by I think Detroit Distillery. It is very good. But normally vodka is not something I would drink straight. It's got a little bit of a burn to it. But
the only vodka, quote unquote, I'll drink straight is what you call it, Pink Whitney.
Yeah, that's like kind of vodka, right?
That's why I'm saying that's the only vodka I would drink straight.
So the Detroit Red Wings lost their last game 4-2 to the Utah Hockey Club. Womp womp. It was not great. I mean, it was okay until it wasn't. It was okay until it wasn't. Berggren scores. Dylan Larkin scores a beautiful like Superman goal, diving across. It was amazing. And then they
loose puck. They came out with some fire, kind of like how they started tonight's game against Washington, where they're attacking every puck. They're winning the puck battles because they're outnumbering them. And then as the game went on, Utah was like, okay, we're going to play hockey too. And then Detroit basically decided that they were done.
Yeah, it was a really poor showing for a game before the trade deadline. Maybe it's jitters. Maybe it's I'm not sure where I'm going to be after the deadline kind of thing. Like you said, they came out in this game against the Washington Capitals, 6 minutes of what I would call perfect hockey. That's what it was. Washington did not get a shot on goal. It was consistent pressure. They scored. Dylan Larkin scored right at the beginning of the game. You got another goal in there as well. So it's now 2-1. And it's looking okay. Washington has figured out that they're actually playing a game tonight, so they're coming back. But the biggest news out of that Utah game, it was the NHL debut for Carter Mazur. Like, yay. Big hype kid we've been waiting forever to see. He's been marred by injury, goes back to Grand Rapids, is doing well. I mean, almost a point per game since his return. And he's out.
And
it looks like he hurt his shoulder.
According to his father, dislocated elbow.
Ow, that's somehow worse.
Did you see the elbow? His dad posted on Facebook after the fact.
No, I did not.
Yeah.
But they placed him on IR today, so he has to miss a minimum of 7 days in order to be reactivated. I do have hope that he will be back before the end of the season and playing in Detroit. I don't know what the timetable is on a dislocated elbow. To me, that's just a weird injury anyways. But it's sad news because like, it was really exciting. This is his childhood dream. There's a picture of him that's like, I want to play for the Detroit Red Wings when he's a kid. And now it's like, it showed it next to his jersey in the locker. It's like dream come true, plays 2 shifts, and now he's out.
Yeah, the NHL picked it up. I mean, NHL posted the video of him flipping a puck to his mom during the pregame skate. But no, here's the post from his dad via Facebook. Jeffrey Mazur stated, quote, easier to touch base on Facebook. Second shift, Carter hit the boards and dislocated his elbow. He was at the ER for medication and resetting of the elbow. There you go.
Yeah, I'm trying to look up a timetable. Recovery for a dislocated elbow can take several weeks and may include a period of physical therapy. 1 to 3 weeks in a sling, 4 to 6 wear a sling after surgery if you need surgery, and begin physical therapy. But it doesn't say anything about surgery on the post, right? Just that he had to pop back in.
This was literally right after it happened.
Okay, so I mean, it could be a few weeks if it doesn't require surgery. It says immobile in a splint or sling for 1 to 3 weeks for a simple elbow dislocation. So you're losing Mazur for a while. Dominic Shine was recalled as well today. He's in the game. He's already got a fight.
Partly because they lost Fisher.
Yeah, well, yeah, they lost Fisher. That was the other piece of news. They lost Christian Fisher to waivers claimed by the Columbus Blue Jackets. So Shine's in. He's got a fight tonight. And it also is going to lead into something that we'll talk about a little bit later in the Yzerman press conference notes. But they dropped that game to Utah heading into the trade deadline. And then we wake up bright and early this morning. We're like, yes, Yzerman is going to do something for this team to get them into the playoffs. And we're waiting. And we're waiting. And we're waiting. And we're waiting. And then Yzerman pulls the proverbial rabbit out of his hat in the final hour. And the Detroit Red Wings trade with the Chicago Blackhawks. Detroit receives Craig Smith and Petr Mrazek. Chicago receives Joe Veleno. And all I heard across the entire internet was one giant collective fart noise.
Yep.
Ryan, I want to hear your feelings on it before I talk about it, but I'm assuming you're underwhelmed.
I mean, that's a word to use. There's a lot of different ways you could go. And really, from the going back to last week, the comments from the pundits and everybody else was this is leading up to be a seller's market because everyone's so tight, sort of afraid to make a move unless you're the Boston Bruins who gave up on life. To me, it's almost like they've, after the last couple of games, have tossed Alex Lyon to the curb. You bring in a guy that's maybe the same type of player with Mrazek, in which you're not really sure what you're going to get from him night in and night out. And that goes back to even when he was with Detroit. Not a whole lot has changed. He can be absolutely on fire and you're going to love him, or he's going to let in the dumbest goals in the world because he's trying to go do something crazy and you hate him.
He's also going to, at points, play 300 feet out of his own net.
Yeah. He tries to pull a Hasek and you're like, oh, cool. What are you doing? And they're like, no, what are you doing? Seriously, get back in your net. You can go either way with it, and it's mildly terrifying. But then you've got Craig Smith, who doesn't solve anything for you in the center sphere, because he's not going to be taking faceoffs. He's taken less than 100 total, I think, this year, which means that he's only getting in there. Actually, he's in less than that to take a draw by the center that got kicked out. So you're hoping from him to provide some depth scoring, which for all intents and purposes, they need it. Joe Veleno wasn't really doing that, and he's a veteran guy, been around for a while, and can give you maybe a little bit of a spark. He plays hard. I think that's the other important aspect to it all. So, yeah, underwhelming for sure, because the names that we talked about, we did see at least one of them go away in Dylan Cousins. But then you look underneath the surface a little bit, and there's no way that Detroit could have matched what Ottawa ended up paying to get him.
I mean, they could have, but it would have been a wash at that point. I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
Ottawa trades Norris and some other pieces to get Dylan Cousins. And what I also think is a wash trade for them, if not them losing out on the trade, they've got to really hope that Dylan Cousins, that Buffalo was the problem and that Ottawa can solve it. And I have a really hard time seeing that. I mean, the trade made Brady Tkachuk cry on camera. That is something I didn't think I would ever see, but apparently Josh Norris is like Brady Tkachuk's best friend since they were like kids, and now he's gone. So Ottawa may have made a mistake by disrupting that locker room, and we'll see. I mean, if they did, it's a benefit to us. But back to Craig Smith. Craig Smith is 35 years old. He's 6'1", 203 pounds. This season with the Chicago Blackhawks in 40 games played, has 9 goals, 7 assists for 16 points. The upside is that 7 of his 9 goals are even strength, and all of his assists are even strength. So you wanted 5v5 boost. Craig Smith gives you some 5v5 boost to hopefully offense, which is what Steve Yzerman said. I mean, Craig Smith is a known commodity in the league. He's been around since 2011, most of his seasons with the Nashville Predators, a small stint in Boston, Washington, Dallas, and now Chicago. He's a journeyman NHL player, USA-born guy too, Madison, Wisconsin. But he's as old as me. And in hockey terms, that's normally not good. 35 is you're a year or so away from retirement for guys like Craig Smith. The contract is only until the end of this year, so he is a rental, which is okay. And like you said, just giving up Veleno, who for all intents and purposes stalled. His development stalled, his progression stalled. Every season we heard the same thing from Steve Yzerman. It's, we're hoping Joe takes another step, or Joe looked good in the first half, he needs to be consistent in the second. And it's never happened, which is kind of actually depressing for what we thought Joe Veleno would be able to do.
Yeah, and it goes back to the loan too, kind of echoing that, in that you've seen Joey's Swole Valeno, if you will, play some top line minutes, and you thought, hey, maybe he's going to be an advocator light. He can go out, play the body. He's your puck retrieving guy. Maybe we'll get something there. And then it was cool for a few games and then just went backwards. Then you see him now in the third line. Then you see him get down to the fourth line. Now you're seeing him barely for 10, 12 minutes a game. You could maybe typically rely on him for some PK work, but you weren't really leaning into him for faceoffs. You weren't really leaning into him for anything of importance for that matter. I get it. Everyone has a role for their team, but the way that Valeno went up and down the roster at times, it just kind of, you thought maybe it would happen, but it never clicked. And I think that's frustrating. And I think it was Max that put it out there earlier. He was one of, now Johnny Burgers is the last remaining draft pick from that, was it 2018 draft class, and with Valeno going out the door.
Impressive. And one of the final Ken Holland draft picks. I think Berggren and Rasmussen are like the only remaining Ken Holland draft picks on this team, which is, again, tells you a lot about the state of the team when Yzerman took over, right?
Absolutely. And it just plays to where I get people being pissed off and frustrated about the state of the team and being on that bubble roster playoff spot, excuse me. We're barely 4 years, 5 years removed from being one of the worst teams in hockey, like ever.
Literally one of the worst teams in hockey ever.
And that roster, there's what, two guys, three maybe, I think total. I forget what it was. Valeno was one of the few that had made it through all that hell, and he's now gone. So you've got, I think Larkin and Moose are the only two from the actual roster that survived. Right. And I don't mention Burgers because he was drafted, sure, but he wasn't actually in Detroit at that point. So you've got two guys left of significance. I think Moose in his own right is a significant player for the team and what he can provide. That's almost like another page is turned on the Ken Holland debacle of it for the end of his tenure, if you will.
Yeah, I forgot to mention Dylan Larkin. That was weird.
Well, no, I think no, we mentioned. I think we mentioned Larks, but not like
Yeah,
of everyone else.
yeah, him being again also a Ken Holland draft pick that is on
Yes.
the roster. But the Peter Mrazek of it all is kind of the big part of it, because you looked at it and you're like, oh, the Red Wings, like some people said, yeah, the Red Wings need goalie help because of the way that Lyon and Talbot have been playing. They've just been really inconsistent.
Mhm.
And on most nights lately, not good post break. And we'll talk about Yzerman's comments about Peter Mrazek. This season for the Chicago Blackhawks, he has 33 games played with a 3.46 goals against and an 8.9 save percentage. I pulled up some more stats on Natural Stat Trick. He has, like I said, 33 games played, has faced 766 shots, has 689 saves. This is 5v5 stats. An 8.99 5v5 save percentage. His expected goals against is 69.42, which nice, but he's let in more goals than he's expected to let in. 212 high danger shots against with 170 high danger saves. So 42 of his 77 goals against have been high danger, which is a good amount. Those are the shots that people normally score on. He has an 802 high danger save percentage. He has the best high danger save percentage on his team, above Arvid Soderblom and Drew Commesso, who's got a couple games. But I think you also kind of have to take into account the state. Now that Peter Mrazek, we know, has been inconsistent, but the state of the Chicago Blackhawks defense was bad.
Oh yeah,
Just the
we
Chicago
get mad at
Blackhawks
ours, and they just
just not good. So maybe Peter Mrazek comes in and says, I can play goal now. But I'm not. I think the biggest thing was we knew Peter Mrazek had an ego issue when he was in Detroit. That was a problem, unknown problem. And then we got rid of him. And it's just something that Yzerman is hoping brings stability or helps in net. And it's just, I'm not sure.
well, based on his comments, that's exactly what he's looking for. And now it can be a double-edged sword, because your two goalies that have been here all season, are they going to step up and go to task and make it so Mrazek is a $4 million guy sitting in the box? Or are they just going to force the hand, meaning Mrazek shows up. All right, he's getting a game. And now you're looking at odd man out. I think the odd man out at this point, based on recent performance in particular, is Alex Lyon. And it's a little frustrating because it seemed like Talbot had been struggling. They both are struggling, but Talbot in particular, like those games against Columbus, you can go either way with how you want to react to it, but it just seemed like there's something kind of missing compared to earlier in the season. It made you wonder if he was a little bit overworked, but at the same time, they're just coming off that 2-week layoff, and is that really what's impacting them? We're not sure. But now there's extra little bit of competition. It's a little frustrating in the sense that not another body is there available for them, meaning at the forward or defensive pairing. But doesn't mean that there couldn't be help coming from overseas in the near future, which we could.
Yeah, that is probably on the other side of the break. So what we'll do is we'll take a quick break. We'll talk about Yzerman's press conference notes, what he said and was asked by reporters and got a little bit snarky with some people. Some of the notes there, and then everyone's overall grade on the trade deadline. So give us 1 minute. We will be back after a word from our sponsors. It might not feel like it, but spring's right around the corner. Know how you can tell? Golfers are hitting the links, and we have some tournaments to talk about. And if you want to do more than just talk, put your money where your mouth is. Get in on all the tee to green action with DraftKings Sportsbook. From Thursday's opening round through the closing round Sunday, DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered with tournament props, live betting, odds boosts, and so much more. If you've never bet on golf before, it's easier than you think. Just pick something simple like a golfer to win the tournament and make your pick. It's just that easy. Here's something special for first-timers, though. New DraftKings customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. So download DraftKings Sportsbook app and use code THPN. That's code THPN for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours.
Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. In New York, call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. In Connecticut, help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-789-7777 or visit ccpg.org. Please play responsibly. On behalf of Boot Hill Casino and Resort in Kansas, 21 and over. Age and eligibility varies by jurisdiction. Void in Ontario. Bonus bets expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see dkng.co/ice.
And we're back, and what we are going to talk about is the Steve Yzerman presser. So, just to recap kind of how the trade deadline went overall before we jump into this, it was a seller's market. I mean, there were first-round picks going all over the place. There were high-ish end roster players being traded all over, good prospects being traded. The Leafs traded their first-round pick and high prospects. Brad Marchand went to Florida. Brandon Carlo went to Toronto. Like we already said, Cousins went from Buffalo to Ottawa for Josh Norris. It was a seller's market where there were guys that got second-round picks that maybe on a normal deadline would
Anthony
probably
Beauvillier.
It's like a fourth-round pick player got a second-round pick. Yeah. So it was a seller's market, and Steve Yzerman, when you sit back and look at it, was it a good trade deadline for the Red Wings? No. I think it would have been better if
in terms of flash.
Sure. But I think it would have been better if they did nothing, honestly, than take on Petr Mrazek's contract. I think it would have been better if they did nothing. But the Yzerman, as all GMs do post trade deadline, had a press conference. He started off asking him, how did today go? He said they didn't do everything they wanted to do, had areas that they wanted to address, getting Mrazek and Smith. Smith acquired because of the loss of both Carter Mazur and Christian Fischer. So there was a need there in Fischer getting picked up off waivers and Mazur getting injured, that they needed that kind of depth offensive threat, which Carter Mazur technically would have been. So they had to go out and get a guy. Yeah, they had to go out and get a guy. They're hoping, Steve says they're hoping that Mrazek can provide a boost in net, and that they were not prepared to sacrifice future assets for rental players. There were not a lot of options for players that fit the age group with term. So guys like Cousins, there were not a lot of options like that that would not have cost them more than they were willing to give up.
Sorry, I was watching Johansson get kind of hogged around the ice. No, I get that. And that's the double-edged sword of being in Detroit's position, because people will look at Ottawa and be like, well, they made a move. Why can't Detroit do that? Well, I'm sorry, but did they technically get better with the move that they made, for one? it depends. It's all that one's going to be in the eye of the beholder. I mean, Dylan Cousins is going to be a very good center for them. I think he'll fit in well. Maybe in a little bit more structure compared to whatever Buffalo is at this point, that it works out. But they also had to give up a Josh Norris and a Bernard Docker. Well, I forget his first name, or I would say it. So that's
Jacob. It's Jacob Bernard Docker.
Jacob Bernard Docker. So thank you. When you look at Detroit, for instance, and what they would have had to match that, they really can't. You could argue that the Norris comparison would be Marco Casper because they let up guys that are NHL now players. And then the Bernard Docker one, maybe you look at Johansson, but I don't think that's a fair one to make. I think the next closest move you could do for that one is Edvinsson. So at that point,
I think the Johansson one is close.
But you see where I'm at with it. Like you're now essentially decimating an already rough defensive core to land a young center. That's the price Detroit would have had to pay to make a move like this work. I mean, you look at the move that Dallas made with Logan Stankoven, trading him off, a great young player. They also had to give away 2 first-round picks. And you compare that to what Detroit's got, that's an NHL-ready player. Who matches that level? Is that DeBrincat? That's probably what you lose there to get a Mikko Rantanen. Is that what you want to give up on top of top picks? Because your picks are going to be a lot better than Dallas.
Yeah, I think the saying Logan Stankoven right now, I think Marco Casper has more points than a Logan Stankoven.
Okay.
But you would have, like you said, 2 first-round picks. And he would have also had to agree to extend. That's the only way anyone was trading for Mikko Rantanen was with an agreed upon extension. And it just, like you said, prices were high. And you had stuff that you could have traded, but it would have made no sense because at that point you're washing yourself out or you're making your team worse to try to get a player like that. Yzerman went on to talk a lot about Petr Mrazek. Max Boltman's like, hey, so what's your plans? Like, how do you see Mrazek helping this team? And Yzerman says, I hope he helps them in net with a snarky attitude. Says that he is competitive, that everything is all over the place for goalies around the league. They like that Mrazek is signed for another season. It sounds like Talbot and Mrazek will be the goalies next season. Could do something else at goal. They leave themselves open for any goalie options that present themselves, but they are comfortable with the 2 that they have. When asked how this affects Sebastian Cossa, because that was my question. Right. You go get another goalie with term. You've got Talbot who's got term. You go into next season with 2 goalies under contract. So where does that leave Cossa? We thought he was going to be the backup. For the most part, he says Sebastian's has had a really good year, continues to improve. We'll make the evaluation when Grand Rapids season is over. He'd rather be conservative now, but if Cossa has a good stretch off season and preseason, he could force his way onto this team. Which tells me that unless Cossa does everything perfectly, he will be the starter in Grand Rapids again next season.
Yeah. And again, I go back to the double-edged sword. Like, it'll be frustrating for him. I'm sure it will be. But at the same time, I think you've got flexibility there, depending on what happens with Mrazek and or Talbot, to make the tough call. If Mrazek's the odd man out, you waive him. It's simple as that. If Cossa forces his way in, because I still think even going into, let's see, how old is Talbot? He's 37 right now. He'll be 38 in July. Even if Talbot's the more consistent guy going into training camp in the sort, boom, there's your starter. Then you have Cossa to support him. And even then, you could probably go with a pretty balanced lift, but he's got a true veteran in Talbot to go off of, who's got years of experience. Not saying that Mrazek doesn't, but Talbot's the journeyman. He knows what it takes to truly win in the league, and that's what you can bank off of. Mrazek, you could argue a little bit the same thing. They both are very different goaltenders, in my opinion. But to Yzerman's point, that's one less thing they've got to worry about going into free agency.
Yeah, Petr Mrazek is also not he's not unknown in the AHL. He played one, well, I mean, this must be rehab stints, but he played 1 game in 2020-21 for the Chicago Wolves, 1 game in 2021-22 for the Toronto Marlies. He played forever in Grand Rapids. He is 33 years old, so he's getting to the point where, I mean, there are guys, look at Jack Campbell. They go and they become AHL goalies simply because they can't keep up with the NHL game. That is a brutal hit on Larkin.
That's groin.
We'll see. He went down to the tunnel right before the period was over, so we'll see how he feels coming back. But there was a couple more points that I wanted to talk about for Yzerman, and a really positive one that he was asked about Axel Sandin Pellikka and can they bring him in when his season is done in Sweden, and Yzerman said sure. And so they've got a couple games left. He's done. It's historically been done with players that guys that are under contract, NHL contracts that are playing overseas in places like the SHL. When their season is done, they bring them over to finish the season in the NHL. They would have done it with Casper if he wouldn't have gotten hurt. He got that one
Broke
game.
his kneecap.
Yeah, and then broke his kneecap. He would have probably played the season out. But ASP, I think, even at the level that he is at currently, can still help this team. I mean, defensively, you can't really get much worse than what they've done. And if anything, ASP puts more offense, injects more offense into this team that is absolutely desperately needed. So I think that was a good thing to hear, is that you probably will see Axel Sandin Pellikka before the end of the season in a Red Wings uniform.
I think they need it, to be quite honest. That you look at Yzerman's comments, especially last season in the debacle with Arizona at the trade deadline, and he called out the fact that a lot of the help they need is going to have to be from within. And he's referring to these young guys stepping up and making themselves known. We've seen it with Casper, seen it with Ed, Hansen. Now we're seeing it. We would have seen it with Mazur. Your Soderblom has had a reemergence. If you can have it with Sandin Pellikka and him come in to bring that offensive punch, to have just additional scoring off the blue line, I get it. You've had the last couple of years, we've been a little bit spoiled with some offensive-minded defensemen. We thought maybe Gustafsson was going to bring that this year. It just hasn't come to a head, and it's frustrating. But this is a naturally smart player that I don't think, and Ken Daniels made a great point on the broadcast tonight. After the trade deadline, you can be over the 23-man roster limit as long as you're cap compliant. Guess what?
The Red Wings have a ton of space.
So that leaves the door wide open for him to come in. I will happily put him on a third pair with Gustafsson. Might be a little scary. Could be. But thankfully for a guy like ASP, he can outskate some of the deficiencies of having to learn this new ice, and he can make the plays because he is a smart hockey player. But what else you could possibly do, if you want to get crazy with it, throw him on your second power play. Let him go.
I don't even think that's crazy.
In theory, no. But we've also not seen, I thought we'd maybe see Edvinsson on the second unit, but they've really stuck with Gus back there and trying to make things work. But I think if you throw him on there, it could actually work out very well in your favor. So it's really a no-lose situation, especially if this team can get themselves back up into one of the top two playoff or wildcard spots, top two, the only two wildcard spots. You have nothing to lose, because then that turns into, I mean, we've seen it going way back to when DeKaiser was brought in after getting out of college. He was that undrafted free agent that they brought in. He made an immediate impact on the team. This could be that same type of impact, especially as they make a playoff push.
Yeah, and I think they're going to need it. So the rest of the Yzerman interview came down to one major point, and it was talked a lot about, well, where are we at in the rebuild? Are you happy with what's going on? Why are you not going out and getting these guys? Because we knew that would be the question after the deadline that they had, is why didn't you go do this? Why didn't you go make these deals that other teams made? There's a couple points that were brought up that were really good. He was asked, does holding on to picks and prospects indicate where the rebuild is? He said, for rentals, yes. If a player had term of more than 1 or 2 years, he was open to making deals, but says that type of deal wasn't available. And by that, he means wasn't available for a price that wouldn't have hampered the team, wouldn't have hurt the team or put them back. We're not trying to move backwards. We're on a playoff bubble. We need to improve the team to make the playoffs. He says that he understands the frustration and impatience. Fans know the game and want the team to do well. They did what they thought they could to get a better chance at playoffs. Is it earth-shattering? No. He says we are not giving up picks and prospects for rentals and the hope to get in. Because that's what rentals are. You hope they get you there, because then you're wasting picks and you don't have the player once their contract is up in the summer. So you're you come out net negative at the end of the year. Then our favorite reporter, Carlos Monarez, the edgelord of Detroit. His first question was good. He started out normal. I'm like, wait, Carlos is asking a normal question. What's going on? He says, wouldn't spending a draft pick this year be worth it when you don't know what a first round pick turns into? Yzerman says, no, the guys that are going to make us better weren't fetching just a first round pick. And they weren't. They were getting firsts and prospects and roster players, which we're not equipped to do at this point. He says
prospect wise, arguably, yes. But
sure,
roster players, no. And that's what we saw a lot of.
Yep. Says using a first today, there wasn't even something to consider, not even a rental that would have just gotten a first round pick. Now, I'll counter that by saying Brad Marchand got traded for a second round pick.
Conditional. Could be a first.
It could be a first, but there's have to win playoff round implications, and there was no way the Wings are doing that. He says, Yzerman says getting a difference maker would have taken a first plus, and he wasn't going to do that. When you sit at the draft as a team, this is a great point. When you sit at the draft as a team still building, not having high picks to build with, one, looks terrible, and two, is not a way to build your team. So say you get in the playoffs, you're matched up against Toronto round one, you're bounced round one. I mean, it's Toronto, so you might win a round, but you're bounced round one, and then you get to the draft and you don't have a pick in the first round, and you don't have a pick in the second round, and you're left wondering, what am I doing? How am I going to keep building this team when I don't have the picks to do it?
Yeah, you know a team in Detroit that can afford to do that right now? The Lions. You know why?
Oh, yeah,
because they're a Super Bowl contender.
And that's another thing Yzerman said. Yzerman said teams that are pushing for a cup, those are the teams that can do it. You look at your teams like Washington, who's top in points. They can do that. Florida's got the team already. They've won a cup. They can do that. They've won their cup already. They're going for bonus cups. They can do that.
Did it.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, these are teams that they've been in the playoffs for a long time. They've been consistently good. They've been consistently pushing. It's a difference between trade deadline as a contender and trade deadline as a hopeful. That's the difference. Hopefuls do not have the luxury of breaking down their team just to try to get in.
And that's not to say that we're on board with that entirely, because as fans, we want to see this team get better. But when you take the step back and look at those comments, you look at the roster, you look at what's in Grand Rapids and what the prospect, everything that's going on. And then you compare that to the trades, kind of like what we've been talking about a little bit. Detroit doing that this season in particular, if they don't make the playoffs, now you're going back to, well, they made these moves. Why would they do that if they knew they weren't going to make the playoffs? Like, you can't really win in any of these scenarios. So playing, again, the long game, which for a very long time, Yzerman has preached patience. Yes, and I've said it several times over. If they don't make the playoffs this year, for many, many fans, that leash is going to become extremely short for how much more they're willing to be out of the playoffs as a fan base. But someone said it a while, I forget who it was on X, that it took them, 40 plus years to finally win a cup. Jimmy Devellano, he was in charge of a very good roster of Red Wings. Took them a very long time to be impactful to finally make a run with Steve Yzerman and go after a cup. And then they had that sustained success. And that half of that, though, was and it took them 13 years in a non-salary cap era to get into the playoffs. Like, it's a night and day scenario that he is trying to work through. And like we said, they had one of the worst teams ever a couple years ago.
It was our friends at Vintage Detroit. They tweeted, "Settle down, everyone. We waited 42 years for the cup to come back home 4 times. I think we can wait a couple more." Another point. So after Carlos asked a very good journalistic question, he then goes full clown mode and says, Steve doesn't even know if he's going. You don't even know if you're going to be here when those picks make the team. Steve says he's going to do what's best for the organization. Plans could change, but he's not going to just make moves because he feels he needs to save his job. He wants to make the playoffs and win a cup as much as anyone. Takes full responsibility for where they're at. Going to make the best long and short-term decisions for the team, which he said over and over again.
You know who made moves to save their job? Ken Holland.
Yeah. Well,
who made moves to stay relevant? Ken Holland. Who destroyed this team into that led into Steve Yzerman's tenure? Ken Holland. Not to say that we don't love Ken Holland and what he did for this organization. Fantastic. Helped lead them several cups, sustained success, brought in some of the greatest coaches ever. But he gave Yzerman the shit sandwich that we are finally seeing go away. That's why I made mention of the 2018 picks, with Burgers being the last man standing. That is brutal. And now we're getting through it.
The last thing that Yzerman mentions, he was asked about the team being harder to play against. They said, like, how do you make the team harder to play against? He says the players need to be more tenacious. They'll continue to add guys that play hard, get size. They say the team right now is not hard enough to play against. That's why guys like Dom Shine are coming in. That's why Craig Smith, who is a tougher player in the league, he's not afraid to bang bodies. He's not afraid to get dirty in the corners and push people around. He'll be coming in, adding size, adding grit to the team. He also says it based on the Four Nations. Whether people like it or not, fighting is going to make a comeback in hockey, because he says that put everyone on notice and that got everyone watching. He says it is going to make a comeback. So to me, that signals Yzerman is going to go out there and just get bigger guys. And he mentioned they had McCarty, who was 220 pounds. They had Joe Koser, who was 220 pounds. They had Malpe, who was 220 pounds. They had guys that were able to come in, that were able to throw down, that were big bodies. He said, and the quote was something to the effect of, at the end of the night, we weren't the ones limping off the ice. It was those guys that were limping off the ice.
Yeah.
So that's what you need. You need the guys whose bodies can take that beating, who can go out there night in and night out and just provide that rough style of game to let your guys like Dylan Larkin run around and do what they need to do, Lucas Raymond run around and do what they need to do, to give those guys the space and the freedom to just stay healthy, really, is what you need. So I thought it was an insightful press conference. It left me thinking, you know what, Yzerman, you're correct. Even though I think that your grade goes down for acquiring Petr Mrazek, because I think that was completely unnecessary. We ran a poll over on Twitter. How would you grade Steve Yzerman's trade deadline? I didn't even give A as an option because I know no one would take it. Most 1,340 votes so far. There's actually like 20 hours left. 34%, almost 35% are giving it an F. 26% a D, 26% a C, 12% a B. I'm right now like a C minus. I mean, like I said, I think it would have been average if he did nothing. I think picking up Mrazek was unnecessary for the cap hit that he's at, for the current goalie situation. I think he overthought that. So right now I'm at a C minus.
Yeah, but at the same time, there wasn't really a whole lot he could do in terms of a goalie. And if you were trying to go out and get a Jordan Bennington, as was rumored or just talked about in general, you were paying a significant amount more than Joe Veleno. So to that point, I mean, I had low expectations going into it. I know that we talked about several names that would have been freaking awesome to see in the uniform, but at the same time, there's a reality to it all, and we saw that reality today. It sucks, at least for now, meaning we're not in that position to make that blockbuster move at the trade deadline. Maybe something good and crazy could happen come July 1st, but time will tell. I think a lot will depend on how this team finishes out the season. But I would say C minus, that's fair. The bar was low. They somehow maybe went still even below it with the Mrazek. I think Mrazek is just, I don't know. They're talking about it on the broadcast. I can't hear it, but I really hope that he can bring some stability, because the comments where they're carrying all three, and see what happens.
Yeah, that was the other thing. They will be rotating the three goalies. He says he doesn't know how they're going to divide games yet, but they will carry all three. And I mean, could be a blessing in disguise. It gives goalies more time to rest, which overworking was part of the problem for Lyon last season. Seems like it might be getting to Talbot a little bit. So maybe the extra rest for them will do them good, and it does help them get in. But Ryan, I want to get your final thoughts before we sign off tonight.
Final thoughts. It's still a long process. As much as we don't want to admit it, we want that immediate satisfaction as a society. Typically, we see it with other sports, how it can be done. People are trying to compare this team to the Pistons, how the Pistons have made a 360, how the Lions have so quickly brought themselves the relevance. The Tigers managed to sneak into the playoffs last season with many guys that you look at the roster, you're like, who the hell is this? And that was after they sold off a top prospect or top pitcher, excuse me, in Flaherty to the Dodgers. And that wasn't even the only move that they made. So there was things that took place with these other teams. You've got to go with what you got. The Tigers, I think, embodied that the most with what, and that I think that's the most comparable with what you can go with in terms of the Red Wings. There's a lot of guys that need to make an impact. Tigers had that click at the right moment. They finally got it into the playoffs, and it was fun to watch. That could very well be this Red Wings team because we've seen it. Twice they've gone on 7-game win streaks under McClellan. They've done it in both ways, scoring a lot of goals, not scoring hardly any goals, and having good goaltending. They can play with anyone in the league, and that's important. If they get in, a lot can happen. So hopefully they can make that. They can surprise us all and squeeze into the playoffs, and then new season. Already Ryan 33.
Yeah, I think it would be like once we make the playoffs, people are just going to be bitching about something else. They're going to be bitching about getting bounced in the first round, or they're going to be bitching about whatever. But to get there would be nice. But again, I think we just need to remind everyone that it's about building the foundation. It's about getting those prospects up and seeing what you have in them, and then knowing what you need to do to take that next step. And right now it's moving in guys like Mazer for a long term and seeing what he can do. It's moving in guys like ASP, moving in guys up and in guys like a Michael Bransick Nygaard, and seeing what they can provide for your team before you say, okay, these are the pieces I can trade, just to try to go a little bit further. And you say that, and then Cam Talbot lets in another goal. But it's, again, a process. Rebuilds take time, especially when it's like
terrible
you said,
positioning, by the way.
when you said we were literally the worst team in almost NHL history just 4 seasons ago. So give it some time. Give Yzerman a little bit of space. I'm not calling for his head.
6 years.
People that are calling for Yzerman's head, it's really short-sighted. But you can follow me online, Bringing the Wing. You can follow Grindline Podcast online at Grindline Pod. I'll give a shout out to the Hockey Podcast Network and thank them for hosting us around Vintage Detroit, which is the only place you should get your Detroit jerseys from and worked on. And we do have an exclusive t-shirt collection with them. So you can go to the Vintage Detroit collection website, click on the Keep It Local tab, click on the Grindline Podcast. You'll be able to see our stuff there. You can also sub and follow us on YouTube and turn on those notifications. You'll get notified whenever an episode goes live. But that is going to do it for us tonight. So for Ryan, I am Greg. You stay classy, Hockey Town.